I think we are standing in between you and the lunch, but I appreciated Thunder for welcoming this panel. And a very interesting session just before this by Mr. Joshi, defining what are the security challenges and how you could back up data in a secure manner in the multi-cloud or hybrid cloud or the complex environment that we are adopting. So the BFSI, entire BFSI space, as you see, is going through transformation. Many companies have launched digital transformation. And we are in a situation as CXOs of these organizations, we don't know what kind of data and where it is and how secure it is. And how quickly the customers or other stakeholders can access the data at a requirement, and how fast we are in quickly transforming data, adapting data, and also accessing data when the needs arise to furnish the data or analyze the data, as the case may be. So it's resulted in serious business challenges, security challenges, risk management challenges, and compliance challenges. Today, as we speak, I've got a very illustrious panel with us. So I've got on my right Mr. Sunil Krishnan, Chief Compliance Officer of Federal Bank, Mr. Ashutosh Mishra, Chief Risk Officer of NABARD, Satyan, Chief Risk Officer of TADA, AIG General Insurance, and Mr. Ranade from Comvault, Sales Director for South Asia and India. So, very interesting panel: technology, sales, marketing, risk management, and compliance. So, my first question would be to Mr. Krishnan on how does he access data and what are the challenges that he faces in this kind of complex environment that we live in, and how does he address it?
Yeah, good noon, and thank you very much, Mr. Krishnan, for this question. First itself, a caveat from my side: I'm not a technology person, a hardcore compliance and a legal person. So, what I would like to present is from the perspective, what is the background actually, and what are the challenges from that larger picture, and what is the transformation happening in the industry, particularly in the banking context, and how the data challenges are coming up. The technology solutions, definitely I believe the experts will speak about it. The first thing I will put in a perspective is that the difference between expectation and the reality. Let us look into the expectation. What is the customer expectation from the banking side it is coming up as far as data is concerned? Customer believes whatever data he has given, whether to the bank or to the fintech partner or to the service provider, everything to be protected by the bank. That is the expectation. And you look at the way whether the customer, and in India specifically, if you in the developed world or Singapore or Hong Kong, if you ask the name of the customer, he will think twice to reveal that name. No other facts will be revealed. But in India, if you ask the name, he will give the name, date of birth of your parents and the in-laws also, because on the birthday you will get an offer, 50% reduction. So people are very loose in releasing their data. Number one. Second thing, customers' expectation now is ease of business, ease of doing the transaction. If I do put a security, either an OTP or any other mechanism to secure the data or in his transaction, then the first call will come. Very cumbersome process. No other bank is asking. You are putting, I am frustrated. That is the expectation. And then they expect that whatever data has been given to all these forms needs to be protected by the bank. That is the expectation and the reality. Second, look at the regulator. Very interestingly, some 2 months back, I got a call from a very senior official saying that, look, my wife has been duped. She was internet to purchase a TV, and somebody duped her, the money has been transferred from an account, and it has moved 3-4 banks and finally landed your lap. What is the security you are having? I asked, sir, you are sending, how it has all happened. She has even revealed the OTP to the fraudster, and that is where it has happened. So I asked, sir, in a week at least, you will send me at least 2 or 3 seaside advisors. At least one circular if you are sending to me, if you read out to your wife, this would not have been happened. So that much carelessness we can see when the data is being actually handled. The problem here in OTP, if you book a taxi service, if you book a Flipkart, you need to give the OTP. So the very same looseness, they are giving the OTP for even banking transactions. So they are not able to distinguish between where the OTP to be released, which OTP is very seriously going back to your account. So this is and the regulator expects, there is no regulation whether to manage the cloud managers or of course, there are data protection related broader guidelines from a banking perspective. If you look at with regard to the fintech partners and all, it's an evolving stage. But still the regulator expects everything needs to be managed. Now, another simple example, the regulatory expectation you can see, any app you are downloading on your mobile, definitely it will ask, give me the contact, give me the access to your photos, give me the access to your messaging. There is a rational reason. Because if you want an OTP to be sent, or if you want from your contact a money to be transmitted very fast, they require that access. But when this access is given, the regulator's question to me is, why they require it? I said, which government app is not collecting this? IRCT is asking this. There you have no problem. We are all under a presumption if a government authority is asking. And interestingly, a few days back only, the CAG has released on UDAI what the audit they have done and the reports. And the data leakages and the challenges what UDAI is facing has been reported there. So when a bank from our perspective, certain this, without the information being given, we will not be able to provide the services. And that is what the ease of service and what is the service actually customer is expecting from the bank. And now, look at the last phase, I would say, the biggest challenge. Earlier, customer is giving the data, bank is storing the data, yes, I can protect everything. It moved on subsequently to service providers. That also, I am sharing the data, so service provider, I have full control. The third stage, what has happened is, when the fintech partners came, they said, we will collect the data and provide to you. So a portion of the earlier, the 90% of the data collected by fintech is coming to me. At least it is once it is reached my server or my database, I can protect to that extent. The rest of the things you can take the customer consent and do it. And the fourth stage now, what is happening is, all these fintech firms have enhanced service. It is not my own fintech partner. They have multiple fintech multiple arrangements with different financial institutions, and they have their database of customers. I am actually sourcing their customer database to serve the products or offer the products. So the difference is that hell lot of data is available, and I am getting, instead of 90%, only 10 or 15% of the data only from the bank. Still, the regulatory and customer expectation is that the entire data what has been served to the fintech needs to be provided. Even the data given to the kirana shop owner, bank has to protect. This is where the reality and the expectation. With this challenge, what is the mechanism I have to ensure the data protection? Regulatorily, I told nothing is there. Of course, there are seaside advisors. So all these advisors, what will happen is, I will protect my system to a great extent, and I will do certain controls to that extent. Another thing, what I have only mechanism is the contract. Only based on the contractual conditions, I am telling that these things to be ensured. And any of the fintech partner, any of the service provider have
subcontracting and other purchases, lot of arrangements are there. The regulatory expectation, I should have a control over all of these arrangements. And I can understand Amazon if I am directly doing, or a Google I am having a direct, I can have a better control. But my main fintech partner, whatever solution is giving, he will not have any control if he has a backup with the Google or from the Amazon he is taking up. So all these things we are expected. So we are all thinking assumptions and presumptions, these things will happen, and all things are put in a contractual context. Now, let us look into a next different stage also. The data from my side is now moving to cloud. It's a very, very remote location. I don't know where exactly it is, who are all coming there, who are all going out of it, nothing I don't know. One part, yes, I assume, yes, it is Amazon and a big player, he will have all, and definitely better than my IT guy, they will protect the data because it is their bread and butter business to that extent. They developed the talent to that extent. That is assumption. Now, from there, then we are facing that source the data coming to my system and it doing the processing, lot of time is being taken. So then comes the data being stored at the edge. So there are multiple coming. The data is gone, data is coming, it's stored. So how many parties are coming in all these arrangements? So any process handover has got a gap, has got a risk. That is generally from a compliance or a risk perspective, that is the perception. So these are all the risks and challenges we are facing, and one and only mechanism right now we have legally is the contract. And in India, execution of a contract is not an easy job. It is a very, very difficult job. It will be all contractual conditions are there. So what all things in that context bank can do? Definitely protect our system, educate the employees, educate the customers to that extent, ensure all, and one fundamental thing what I have seen, all the data leakage or attack and everything happened is certain simple rules are not followed. So if we can follow all those rules to that extent, definitely there will not be a window or a small hole for the hacker or somebody to come or happen the data leakage. That is the second part education and the control system. And third thing what we would like to do is that limit our system's access or the machine's access to the outside world. Wherever we are giving that access, that is necessary because that is where the traffic happens. At that time, make good control, full control mechanism coming up. So that is what many of the organization, all this internet access and everything has been removed. And all the data transmission, remember, is happening through the internet. So that is the line. Of course, we can encrypt, you can decrypt all, but that is the pipeline. Nobody has the control. That is what the reality. So I will stop it here. Because of these challenges, these are the mechanisms right now we have, and we believe there will be better solution from the technology partners. Thank you.
Yeah, very interesting. In fact, I've had similar experiences when I dealt with my own regulator on data leakage. Because if customer data is leaked to any source and they believe the customer is our customer, then we have responsibility to that. And so this is a reality of life or challenges that we face. And of course, legally, regulatorily, strictly, I don't think the institution is in the wrong as long as the basic controls are there, but the expectation is that. And same kind of expectations are echoed by the customers. So you have a challenge there, real challenge from a compliance angle, from a legal angle, if suits are filed against you or the regulator takes an action and asks you to be strict in outsourcing contracts. And then what happens to the contract, subcontract? Vendor number 4, vendor number 5, vendor number 6 is again an issue. Because you have access to vendor number 1, vendor number 2 maybe, and you have controls there. But if there is some further subcontracting, you restrict that probably in the law, in the suit, or in the contract. But even then, it's very difficult to administer the vendor. We do vendor audits, but the findings are far too many, starker than what the findings are for our own organization. How do you control that? How do you secure that? It's a challenge. My next question is to Mr. Ashutosh Mishra. I guess risk manager's job is all about today analyzing data and finding out the patterns in data, especially from a risk angle, because you need to look at risk scores, risk patterns, and how do you, as a risk head of a very large organization, manage enterprise data, and from a risk angle, how do you address that?
Thank you, Sundar, for this question. This question brings in quite a few dimensions to the entire thing. My co-panelists have come up with fairly comprehensive responses to the questions which were posed. I would like to look at the entire thing from a rather common sense perspective, as a risk head would look at, rather than from a technical perspective. Interestingly, this leadership summit talks about India's banking future, and the banking future has to go through the digital highway. That is how I look at the caption. Okay. And on that count, we have no doubt at all that if the banking has to become exponential, banking has to reach every nook and corner of the country, every person who requires banking service is to be provided with the banking service, the way is only digital. And then this was revalidated during the tough times we had, when we had the pandemic, and initially there were a lot of doubts, apprehension, whether the banks which were more into a brick and mortar kind of operation are really geared up to handle these challenges. And then, as we saw in one of the presentations, is that while the digitalization went up exponentially, and even the banks which were not into working remotely went into remote working, the breaches, the data breaches, the efforts to get into the systems actually increased manifold. Okay. And that, in fact, opened up the eyes of the CROs, the board, the CEO, everybody into what calamities can really happen when you operate digitally and you are trying to scale up your operations, and then you also get to understand that there is a whole outside world which is out to breach into your systems, breach into the very valuable data that you are having, the data that may be within your systems, or maybe that is in the cloud that you have taken up and that is in the cloud, and then the consequences would be very, very calamitous for each of us. It would not only be calamitous for the BFSI agency who is handling the data, but for the customer, for the others who are part of this chain, could be extremely calamitous. So that opened up the eyes afresh as to what could be the possible risk and how this can be minimized. As Mr. Sunil Kumar said, the way that most banks are operating or the NBFCs are operating is through a tie-up with a fintech. And that is the way to go ahead, because if I want to scale up my operations, if I want to really upscale the way I am doing things, then the strength of two different entities have to be kind of quest, so that both of them get the best out of that. And there comes certain challenges. And how to meet those challenges, because we have no other way but to go digital, and how to meet the challenges is the big issue. I would have liked to clarify one thing right from the beginning. The views that I am giving here have nothing to do with the organizations that I work for. These are my professional views as a risk manager. Okay. And that is how I'd like to qualify all the comments and the observations that I am making. So what we have observed is that, as you know, we, from an organization perspective, also finance a lot of BFSI players, especially the NBFCs and the microfinance institutions. And what we have seen is that while on a digital front, they are ways ahead. They are way ahead compared to the banks who are into digital mode. The NBFCs are probably much ahead in terms of their digitalization, in terms of the way they are operating. But sometimes what happens is that the regulatory enforcement or the regulatory rigor may be very different for the highly regulated institutions like banks or insurance company as compared to the NBFCs, etc. Of course, the RBI has of late come up with tightening those regulations also. What I'm trying to hint at is that those slightly relaxed regulatory regimen could be the reason while for which the NBFCs could be more into the digital path for the purpose of expansion of the business than into looking at tightening the various risks which could come on account of the huge amount of data they have with us and the way they will have to also transfer the data to the other players. And what would be a solution? Is there a rule-based solution to the entire thing? Can you have rules and look at compliances and making sure that these are complied? I would, from a CRO's perspective or somebody who has been into the field of risk management for a while, what I would say is that having rules and looking at enforcement of those rules may not provide you with a solution, may not provide you with the entire solution. The solution could be a mixed approach where there would be certain rules, but as one of my earlier panelists said, that it has to be a combination of bringing about risk awareness among all stakeholders, that what is the importance of privacy of data and why we have to hold them sacrosanct. And this awareness has to seep in not only to the customers, not only to the banks or the NBFC who are handling that, but also to each of the employees, each of the players who are part of the chain. And that would be very important in bringing about the way we would want data to be used, and data has to be secured and protected. These examples which you are given by Mr. Sunil Kumar, when he said that anything that we do, any app that we want to use, they require all our information. And as a society, probably we are a little prone to give away all kinds of information. That probably could be on account of lack of awareness as to how the information could be misused. When I share my date of birth, my place of birth, my mother's name, obviously all those information can be very badly misused, and probably awareness of those things could bring in the data security to a new level. There are so many dimensions which could be discussed within the panel. I leave it to the other panelists to elucidate on other matters. Thank you.
Thank you. I think very interesting point you raised. Increasing awareness of all stakeholders. I think we do road shops and programs, risk road shows. So those things bring in awareness amongst employees, vendors, and others. My next question is to the Chief Risk Officer from Tata AI Life, General Insurance, Mr. Satyan. You spoke of a very interesting experience that you'd gone for enterprise risk management presentation to the regulator, and the regulator wanted you to chuck it across cyber-security based risk management presentation. How was your transformation? Can you reveal some interesting aspects of that? Yeah.
I think, well, the challenge of you engaging the board, engaging the risk management committees, engaging the regulators in a simplified language of what exactly is the risk on the transaction level, at the ground level, is itself a challenge. The entire aspect of having to communicate the risk from a perspective of what is the technological gap you have at the transaction level, and how exactly you put that forth from a perspective of what is a risk that is emerging or which is already been there in the system, and what would the exact impact, is something which also has to come to a financial terms. There are a lot of mechanisms of value at risk as a mechanism where you try to convey the impact, or on the financial impact from impact to those financials. But every technological control weakness is not, it is quite tough to communicate from a VAR perspective or from a financial impact perspective. So that's the journey I think we all have to take, in terms of putting that right communication in place from what is an information security risk, what is a technology risk, and what exactly is the financial impact to it. So that transition is something quite important, because end of the day, from a regulatory perspective, from a board perspective, what they see is a financial impact rather than what exactly is a technology gap. So I think here the entire perspective becomes very important, is how you define your security strategy and how you define your security roadmap. Because the entire components really bridge up to your enterprise risk management. The type of assurance you need to give is to build that right security roadmap where your data controls are being protected. I think my co-panelists have already highlighted the type of questions that come from regulator and the compliance perspective, and what exactly is happening on the, on the ground at the business level. So in order to bridge that gap, you need to have a right security strategy so that your data controls are intact. So when you say how the data is getting generated, how the data is getting communicated, and how the data is exactly getting stored in the entire life cycle of the data movement, there has to be a right amount of security strategy getting implemented. And then the corresponding assurance you give to the enterprise risk framework, where how exactly these controls are operating. And I think we have so many vendors presently in this conference, which actually give you a right assurance in terms of the controls that are operating from the protection of a data perspective. And then you have to collaborate that and put it into a certain structure where you see that what controls are operating, what controls are not operating, and what controls are implemented and what controls have to be implemented. A control gap will really give you a better indication in terms of whether you need a security solution for it or whether you need a process solution for it. So sometimes a process roundabout will really help to bridge that control, and sometimes a security investment will help you to build that control. So plugging those controls, and then you give an assurance to the management and the board and the regulator how exactly the financial impact is getting contained. So that's the transformation journey which I think we, everybody, enterprises have to take, putting the right control environment, putting the right security strategy, plugging those controls, identifying the controls which are already operating, which are not operating, which are the new controls you want to operate, and what is the cost of the new control. And when you have the right definition in place, I think then bringing the right solution and putting the right communication would also really be helpful for everybody. Thank you.
Very interesting, because risk could be any risk. A technology loophole could be a financial risk, could be a reputation risk, and of course, per se, it's a technology risk. So that's the world that we live in now. Everything is mixed: data, finance, reputation. So you need to redefine security in this kind of challenged world. Added to this is the hackers. They're far matured, far smarter, and far better and quicker in terms of systems, process, and technology that they have. So many BFSI institutions are facing ransomware attacks. And I think you blackmailed to load off money to get the access to your own systems. And then, of course, when you do a dark net surfing, you find customer data over there. And so it's a reputation loss, it's a security challenge, it's a regulatory challenge, it's a risk challenge, and a compliance challenge. And that's the world we live in as a BFSI outfit. So redefining security in this kind of transgressed world or highly challenged world is a challenge or a risk. I think we have a very good speaker from Commvault here. I would like Mr. Ranade to touch upon these aspects.
Am I audible? Am I audible? Hello? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks. And we heard a lot of things in terms of how a chief risk officer looks at it. Probably technology can solve certain aspects. And I would like to suggest a framework which we follow in our product itself. Okay, so first thing is, as everybody has mentioned, right, data is the most important asset in any organization today. So first you need to identify what kind of data you have. That's the first step, right? In terms of, if you identify that data, then you can classify it. How sensitive it is it important, not important, how can I protect it? So all those things come in when you identify what kind of data is it. The second aspect is in terms of how do you protect that data? based on the classification you have done, how do you protect that data? You can have zero trust networks, you can put in a lot of things, encryption and all those things, right? Or for that matter, if you look at it, we have something called as anomaly detection. So we can have honeypots. Because as mentioned by Amay also, right, endpoint is where most of your data is residing. How can I protect that? Because those guys are the most vulnerable of all. They are not educated, or the learnings have not been passed on. They click on certain things. How can I protect that? So those things have to be taken care of. The third and the most important aspect is, how do I monitor this? Can I have a single dashboard to manage the entire landscape? Because if you have so many heterogeneous environments, managing the leakage can be from anywhere. So if I can have a single dashboard to monitor all those things through a single pane of glass, that makes life easy. I'm not saying that easy for you, but at least to certain extent, we can make it easy.
Whenever I see a dashboard, I see so many reds and ambers.
Correct.
In so many systems.
Yeah.
And so many things to be fixed.
Absolutely. The fourth aspect, if you look at it, nobody can say 100% I am protected, attack will not happen. It's a reality. You have seen so many attacks happening in the last 2 years. How do I respond to those attacks? That is very critical. Is it spreading across the network? How can I isolate that specific endpoint? How can I make it immutable so that it doesn't spread across the organization? Because the impact is huge. As you rightly mentioned, it can be reputation, it can be financial, it can be anything. So how do I respond to those kind of attacks? That is very critical. And the fifth aspect is, responding is okay, but how can I quickly recover from that data, from that attack? I don't have to go through endless amount of data to restore or recover. How can I quickly recover? And when I'm recovering, can I delete that specific file from that recovered data? That makes recovery very easy and very fast. Most of the times I've seen at many of my customers, recovery is a very painful task. And as the time goes by, the risk and the impact is huge. So how can I quickly recover? So this is the framework which we follow. I think I don't have to tell you, because you have been doing it for so many years, but that's how we can solve it through technology, and that's how it is.
Thanks. Add something? Yeah.
I think one thing I have learned from all the vendors, the product experts, it has been a very, very good experience for me that many a times, the frameworks what we believe are sometimes not the right ones. The product vendors who actually have implemented the solutions at multiple places, the amount of analogy they come with, and the amount of aggregation of thoughts they come with, and how the aggregation of frameworks they come with, many a times they are really right recommending frameworks for the business. So it has been quite a learning opportunity, when we interact with so much good product vendors. The learning is immense. I think I want to just acknowledge that. We learn a lot from you.
I wish we had lots of budget to acquire all the products and solutions, but that's not the reality of life, unfortunately. So we have challenges there also. And we need to decide quickly, ample amount of time available with us. How do you embark on the technology roadmap? So I think we also have the privacy bill coming in. I think my question is to Mr. Sunil Kumar. One of the requirements of this bill is that we need to seek consents from customer and to share data with the outsourced vendor. Actually, outsourced vendor is a wrong term. Outsourced vendors have become business partners. They're probably in-house with you. And how do you do that? Because you need to have detailed sort of consent. You do not, customer cannot just tick a form which allows us to share data. This is what we've been doing so far. But then we would need to change forms, and we would need to change. And the privacy bill is a challenge, and how do you address that?
Yeah, it is very interesting. Yes, privacy bill is a challenge because we were working in a particular way. That was the traditional way, legacy way. That is the reason. But I think almost all countries in the Western world, and I had opportunity to work in the part of the East, and particularly Singapore, Hong Kong and all, I have seen this has been done almost 5 to 6 years back. In Hong Kong, the consent clause requires at least 3 to 4 pages
para wise para, each of the permission required like this. This is easy thing which can be done if you have a physical mode of application form coming from the customer's request. It is very easy. You can have 3-4 pages, and the point is whether customer is reading or not to that extent. And when I have seen in Singapore and Hong Kong, and particularly Europe also, I have seen the same scenario. When a bank wants to assess certain contracts with an external counsel itself, it runs into a big challenge, because even to the counsels in India and all, traditionally they believe you can tell everything, you can reveal to your doctor and the counsel, advocate. But Hong Kong, Singapore like jurisdictions even do not permit that as well. So the countries have already faced these challenges, and very detailed 3 to 4 pages consent clauses. Probably the earlier data protection bill which was presented to Parliament and the new form has diluted to a certain extent some of these concerns, but definitely the consent clause will drastically change, number one. The challenge is on a digital form, but now how the accounts are being opened, even credits are being offered, the banks are actually competing to say that if the other bank is taking 2 minutes, mine is 1 minute. And we are giving credit to us saying that 50 seconds, 40 seconds. Within this 40 seconds, we expect this entire consent clause to be certified by the customer. He is just doing it. So what I have suggested to some of my partners to say that, don't give the final column like that to just say that. Certain paragraphs you have to, and you have to actually, your machine needs to give the enough time to read. So don't allow him to click within a second. Give them 10 seconds, 15 seconds. The challenge is again, it frustrates the customer. That is the point. But then, unless the customers are aware what exactly is, and the point is, one part is taking the consent. That is, I think it may be an easier thing, we can actually document and do it. Beyond that, once this data is with us, how we need to protect, how we need to retrieve, when the customer asks for a change, how to do it, all those things. And it is not only for the customers, it is even for a walk-in customer's data also. Tomorrow he can come. Now the system is there, walk-in customer's data, I will collect how? I will collect the details based on his mobile number, based on his one of the ID. He can have multiple transactions in multiple IDs, multiple phone numbers. So where I am going to connect all these things in the system? There are challenges. And then when he comes back and says, I want to change this portion, I want to change this angle, then with the evidence I need to look into. So that is where the bigger challenge and retrieve and the corrections being carried out. And the penalty level, 2% of your turnover, 5% of your turnover, we never heard of. And I used to say to my colleagues here, RBI to that extent is very sympathetic to us. Their maximum penalties are 1 crore, 5 crore, 10 crore. I worked in environment, there it is 300 million, for 500 million, entire capital can be wiped out. It was, look at the US regulator. When the US regulator started to impose the penalties on European bank, European Union said we should not be back. We should impose same way to US banks the penalties. So that is the way the penalty structure is going. At least in India, we can take some console. RBI is very ruthless and very strict, and now they are each and every point looking into, but at least amount wise, they are more considerate because they know we are all poor, like in a poor country, this is only can be afforded. So that is the only advantage. Thanks.
Very interesting. And to add this, every time you transfer data to a vendor, you need to inform the customer. They will send an SMS and expect the customer to read that SMS or an email. And it's going to add to the challenges to the analytics machines that we have, the computer power we have, and also database challenges, storing these consents, storing the sign-offs, and then getting that when the regulator comes for an inspection or an audit or supervision. So it's a tough challenge, and I was very, very, very interesting aspect from you. Mr. Ashutosh Mishra, how do you address challenges like privacy and in your bank, it's a large bank, so many branches. It's on, I think, yeah.
Thank you. As I said, I'm not going to talk about the organizations that I work for because the views are that of myself as a risk management professional. I like to give a very simple example. Okay, when I was traveling in my car from my office in BKC to this place, I was trying to access a website, and then this particular thing flashed before me. I was trying to access that in my iPad while I was coming here, and then it said the cookie, it said whether you accept all the cookies, which is the most preferred way to accept that, or partial look at the cookies and make a choice and accept that. And there are so many options. So I am not going to tell you which option I clicked at that point of time when I was accessing this thing, but I will tell you I was very close to the place that this particular meeting is taking place, and my driver was almost getting the car to the parking slot. So the point I am trying to make is that this is what the customer has to exercise an option, okay? And how tough an option is that when saying yes or no to a simple thing like cookie policy, okay? And then this can be very vast, very complicated in terms of sharing data. So I will reiterate the earlier point which I made, which is that while a rule-based framework is important, while fines, regulatory fines can also bring in the required culture change in the organization, I would still like to believe that the risk awareness, the sensitivity about the consequences of breach of data among all stakeholders in a progressive but faster way could be a better solution, could possibly be a comprehensive solution to many of the issues that we are facing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think, yeah, so cookies is something that you're innovated with when you have apps and you access some site or an app, and then you have to decide whether you have to accept the cookie or manage the cookie. And we don't know what happens when you say manage the cookie, what kind of controls they have, what kind of parameters they throw. You accept something decent, something basic, something respectable, but we don't know what those standards are in terms of transparency, in terms of clarity of what the path the vendor would take. So my next question is to Mr. Satyan. How do you define security management and kind of risk management in this kind of transformed era?
I think the entire transition from what COVID has brought in is the acceleration into the digital space. So every corporate, I think the method of acquiring the customer and the servicing the customer, the entire life cycle of customer management has moved to digital now. So this entire speed has also led to more about digital journey. And with this digital journey, I think the cybersecurity awareness and the cybersecurity controls is also getting more pertinently important, either from a corporate perspective and from the customer perspective itself. So I think the entire story of cookies is something quite limited. I think we have a bigger problem to solve. Maybe a lot of the financial frauds that happens in the financial ecosystem with a lot of payment solutions. I think the digital journey of which was 10 years before for any enterprise was providing the information to the customer and customer accessing the information and taking a decision. But the financial journey was not through the digital medium. I think from last 5 years, the digital journey is with the financial ecosystem itself, which is quite a transformation. And I think the entire ecosystem of the regulator as well as even the people itself, they were not prepared that how this financial journey would be, taken in the digital ecosystem itself. So there exactly, you have a lot of catch-up game, the catch-up game of awareness, because we also come from an insurance company, and we also, if you really understand how insurance companies operate, over a period of 10 years back, the insurance companies were not much digitally available, or how you have a buying experience or a claims experience on the digital was not there. So the payment experience is also something was new for us. So the entire insurance ecosystem also understand the type of financial frauds that happens in the marketplace. And this entire marketplace has moved from actually marketplace to the digital ecosystem itself. So the amount of awareness, which is what I think my co-panelists have been raising, is something quite desired, where from a customer perspective, from an enterprise perspective, from a regulator perspective, it all will help really to mitigate this entire risk of how exactly the security controls are managed by the employee from an organization perspective, the security controls are managed by the end user when we are accessing our, the websites and doing the financial transactions to the digital ecosystem, and as well as the regulator, how is ensuring that, these entire systems are protected through his own audit mechanisms or through his own supervisory mechanisms. So that's the journey which everybody has to take, and I think there is a learning where everybody will have.
Very interesting. So we'll have to transcend the path of each transaction end to end, I guess, and then think how security could be addressed at each layer. That's a very important thought. Last question before I open it to the floor is, what are the best practices in security management in this kind of era?
So I did mention about the best practices and the framework which you need to follow. Adding to what he talked about cookies, right? You have seen the kind of impact and people monetizing the data. That has huge impact, right? If you look at Apple releasing their new version and then suddenly Facebook's revenue goes down, you have seen the kind of impact it has, right? So I believe personally technology is the way, it's the only way you can solve this problem. You can put a framework and have the right technology to manage it. That's how you are going to solve this. The framework I mentioned in terms of identify, protect, monitor, recur, response, all those things have to be taken into consideration. And the other aspect is removing the manual intervention and automating a lot of things. That will, again, give you a lot of help in terms of how do you resolve this. Having more manual intervention is going to cause problems. That's what I believe.
Yes, I think this is what my boss always tells us. What are the manual intervention points? Remove it quickly. So that's a good solution. I open it to the floor. Any questions to any speaker, please feel free to address. Otherwise, we'll wind up the panel here. I think a very interesting discussion we had on emerging challenges in the digital era and how do you address that. If anyone have any questions, I think we're already sitting between you and the lunch. I think we'll go for the lunch. I think there are no questions. I thank the illustrious panel to the left and the right. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and wisdom.